Pim, thank you so much for joining me today. Looking forward to this conversation very much.
You're welcome.
Pim, let's start off with your clinical work. As a cardiologist, you've described a moment during your clinical career that sparked what we could call your life's question, which is how can consciousness continue once the brain has stopped? So, when did that mystery first shift from curiosity to conviction for you?
It took many years. Like you, I had learned in university medical school that consciousness is a product of brain function. So that's what we know, that's what I was convinced of. So for me, my opinion was that death is the end of everything we are. Until I met a lot of patients who shared the NDE with me. So in 1986, I read a book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, and where he described as a medical student, he died in 1943 of a double pneumonia, and there were no antibiotics available, so he died, declared death, and his body was covered with a sheet. And the nurse was so upset that this young medical student had died that she was able to persuade the medical doctor to give him an injection of adrenaline right into his heart, what was quite uncommon. And after 9 minutes of death, he regained consciousness. He had some problem to find his body back because it was covered with a sheet. But then he shared a very, very deep near-death experience with all the elements we know from Raymond Moody. I had read the book by Raymond Moody, which was published in 1975. But because I did this book, I started to ask my patients who had survived a cardiac arrest if they could remember something from the period of unconsciousness. And then, to my big surprise, within 2 years, out of 50 patients, 12 patients shared the NDE with me. And that was the moment that for me was just a scientific curiosity, because it should impossible to have memories, let alone clear consciousness, cognition, emotions, memories from early childhood, the possibility of perception out of above the lifeless body when the brain doesn't function at all. So that's why it started. And then we started the prospective study in 1988 from 44 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest. It took 4 years and then another 7, 8 years for the longitudinal study. This study was published in the Lancet. And during the period that I met so many patients with the NDE, then I became more and more convinced that there's a continuity of consciousness and death is just the end of our body, but not the end of our consciousness. So it took many years. But now I'm quite sure, I'm convinced that I was wrong as a young doctor.
It's pretty fascinating work because I know as a medical doctor when we talk about things like this in a philosophical manner with medical doctors, it's something that's quite frowned upon, or it's almost like fringe science for to discuss this within a clinical setting. How was that for you? How was it? What was it like to go beyond what we would call just generic medicine?
Well, it was not important what other doctors were thinking about me and about our study. There were some specialists who were open for it, one or two cardiologists and one or two other specialists, but most of them, they were not interested at all. And when they are silent, then you know enough. And it was not important at all for me because I was just following what my heart was telling me. I had to look and try to understand what could be the cause and content of an NDE. So that was the only important thing for me. It was not about the ideas of other people who are usually and still now are willful ignorant and have prejudice about these kind of subjects.
Yeah. In many ways, your research asks one of the oldest philosophical questions, which is what is this relationship between mind and matter? How do you personally define consciousness after decades of studying what appears to survive beyond the brain?
Yeah, I have no definition of consciousness, and there is no definition of consciousness. There are so many aspects of consciousness. I have written an whole chapter in my book, Consciousness Beyond Life, just what we could call consciousness. So there's no definition at all. But I never used the word mind or soul or spirit because so many people have different ideas about these words, so I never used them. I used consciousness and enhanced consciousness and different layers of enhanced consciousness. That's what I'm using.
Mm. You just mentioned the study you did in 2001, and that that Lancet study still remains one of the benchmarks when it comes to NDE research.
Yes.
What you mentioned what convinced you to start that, but what surprised you most about the data as it started to stream in?
Well, I was just open for the results. And what we found in the 344 consecutive survivors of cardiac arrest, that 18% had memories on the period of unconsciousness, so they shared an NDE with us, and 82% did not have any memory at all. So now we compared the two groups with and without an NDE to see if we could find an explanation why only a small percentage of patients report a near-death experience. So when we compared the duration of cardiac arrest, 2 minutes or 8 minutes, it didn't matter at all. When you compared the duration of unconsciousness, 5 minutes or 3 weeks in coma, it didn't matter at all. When you have induced cardiac arrest in electrophysiological studies in the cath lab, usually it takes 20 to 30 seconds to resuscitate. It didn't matter at all. So one of the main conclusions was that until that time, still mostly accepted idea that lack of oxygen in the brain should be an explanation for the cause of the NDE, we could exclude. And also other things like the given medications didn't matter at all. Fear of death before the arrest, a psychological explanation didn't matter at all. Pre-knowledge, that you know that these experiences are possible, didn't matter at all. Religion didn't matter at all. If they are atheist or Christian or Muslim, didn't matter at all. Gender or education didn't matter at all. So the main conclusion of our study was that there was no scientific or medical explanation why only 80% of those people report an NDE. And interesting, there are 3 other prospective studies done in survivors of cardiac arrest, one from Bruce Grayson, and one from Sampani Peter Fennick, and one from Penny Sartori, with a total of 562 survivors of cardiac arrest. And the conclusion, all those 4 prospective studies was there is no medical explanation why people report an NDE. So we could exclude all the, until that time, given explanations, hallucinations, dreams, side effects of drugs, neurotransmitters, anoxia of the brain, etc. We could exclude.
And Pim, when it comes to reportability, because I can imagine when you get bombarded by critics, one of the questions might be, was the brain truly offline? So something could be, someone could ask about the reportability of subjective experiences. How much can we trust that? So for anyone watching or listening, how much of the conscious experiences, how confident can we be, that it occurs during the cardiac arrest rather than moments just before or moments right after?
That's always a good question. But first of all, there have not been too many critical comments. There have been some skeptics, or should say debunkers, just after my book came out in 2007 in the Netherlands. But usually they don't contact me at all. But it is an important question. How do we know that the near-death experience happened during the period of unconsciousness? That is because of the out-of-body experiences. One of the elements, there are many elements, 12 elements, which was reported by Raymond Moody as well. And one of the elements is out-of-body experience. That means that people have a perception out and above their lifeless body. They have the idea they have left their body as an old coat, and they can perceive, not see, but perceive 360 degrees. They see details and an overview at the same time. They can perceive through walls. They can see what happens at the other side of the hospital. They can see what happens at home if they're trying to focus on that. So, and then they can see what people are doing with the CPR or during surgery. They can perceive what is happening. They can know what is being told. They don't hear it, but they know what is being told because they have direct thought transfer. And blind people, blind from birth, can ring us written about it. They have never seen anything. They have never had pictures during dreams. That the first time in the world, when they have an NDE, they can perceive their own body. They can see, they get through the hospital walls and go outside to see the first time that they trees and houses and sun and shadows, etc. So what is, when you have the corroboration of the veridical perceptions, so details of the CPR, then you can prove that this NDE, out-of-body experience, happened during cardiac arrest. And there have been a study done by Jan Holden of about 80 patients, and there's recently a book, The Self Does Not Die, and it has 128 cases of corroborated veridical perceptions. And what they found is 95% what was told was totally correct, was really correct what happened during CPR, during surgery, during general anesthesia, or during coma. So this proves that it happens during cardiac arrest.
Let's go with this for now and take listeners on a journey with us, mapping consciousness beyond the brain, because you've described the brain not as a producer of consciousness, but rather as a transceiver or interface. Yeah. Can you unpack what that metaphor means in scientific terms and how it might fit or conflict other modern neuroscientific theories like global workspace or IIT, etc.?
But first of all, let's discuss what happens during cardiac arrest in brain function. So what we know, there have been studies done in induced cardiac arrest, also, let's say, in the past where there was threshold testing of internal defibrillators, ICDs, but also induced cardiac arrest in animals. And what you see that in induced cardiac arrest, the people lose consciousness within seconds. The blood flow to the brain in the carotid artery is zero within 1 second. The body reflexes are gone, which is a function of the cortex of the brain. The brainstem reflexes are gone. With the gag reflex, you can put a finger in someone's throat. The cortical reflexes and widened pupils who don't react to light are clinical findings. There's no breathing, but the breathing center is close to the brainstem, so they stop breathing as well. So the clinical findings are what the brain doesn't function at all. And when you have the EEG registration, what they did in studies like threshold testing, the EEG flatlines within 10 to 20 seconds. And we know that when you have a CPR, it never happens that a successful CPR is within 20 seconds. It usually in the best organized coronary care unit will take 3-4 minutes. So all the 562 patients of the 4 prospective must have had a flatline EEG, must have no brain function at all, and in minutes between 10 and 20% of those patients reported a near-death experience. So that's what we know from about, and that's a bit about your question about how we see the function of the brain. Because the other thing is the longitudinal study, but we can discuss it later as well about the transformation. But what we know from the brain function, that when there is no brain function at all, people can have what I told you before, cognition, emotions, possibility of perception. They have a review of someone's life. They relive their whole life, are connected with everything what happens in the past, also with people, the consciousness of people in the past. Maybe took something for your small sister, you know how sad she was. You can have future events as well. So everything happens at the same moment. When you come back in your body, you can talk for a week what happens in your life review while your cardiac arrest was 3 or 4 minutes. So there's no time and no space, and everything is connected at the moment that the brain does not function at all. That means that the consciousness is not dependent on brain function. The non-local consciousness, the enhanced consciousness. When we are sitting here now, we have a waking consciousness, and that's dependent on a functioning brain. And the waking consciousness is just a small part of the non-local consciousness, and it's just a small part of the memories we have. But when the brain's function stops, we go in the other non-local realm where there is no, where past and future is acceptable. It's always there. Everything is connected. That means that this kind of consciousness is not dependent on brain function. And to understand it, you can compare it with the, let's say, the mobile telephone. At this very moment, in your room and in my room, there are 200 telephone calls going through you, through the walls, electromagnetic informational fields. There are hundreds of television programs and radio programs and 1 billion websites and YouTube films going through you in the form of electromagnetic informational fields. But you need an instrument to receive it. You need a mobile telephone to get the call they're meant for you. You need a TV set to receive the program. But when your TV set is off, the program is still there. You need another TV set to receive it. And also, I compare now the non-local consciousness with the cloud. The 1 billion websites and YouTube clips, always there. You need a functioning computer to receive it, just part of it, because of the code you use. But the computer does not produce the iCloud, but it receives part of the iCloud. So our brain receives parts of this non-local consciousness. And that's what we call a filter, but also an interface. So you need a function brain to have your waking consciousness. But let's say during deep sleep, the brain is functioning, but you don't receive waking consciousness. So where's your consciousness? When you have general anesthesia, your brain is active, but you don't receive consciousness. So where's your? It's because the receiving capacity of your brain is out. And when you're back in your waking, then you receive again parts of it. And the interesting thing is that when you have a near-death experience, the threshold of consciousness, the receiving capacity of your brain and body has been permanently enhanced. So you receive not just channel 1, your own consciousness, but channel 2, 3, or 4, or 5 of other people. That means what we call the enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They receive information not by your senses or not by the body, and they know what people think, they know what people feel, they see that someone will die in 3 weeks and he dies in 3 weeks, they know that he lost his mother last week, etc. So they got information because the reception ability of the brain is permanently enhanced. And it's also fits with the concept of the brain as a receiver of interface.
And I think it's fascinating because today when people talk about things like the brain-gut axis, and when you look at the enteric nervous system and how highly functional it is, it's interesting that we tend to still focus on the cortex and the brain as this main system for this transmission or receiving of events, because it could be then plausible that the enteric, the nervous system, is just as vital to some of this information transmitting. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we did also, I've told you, induce cardiac arrest in animals. And we saw in those animals that the deeper function of the brain, the brainstem, didn't function at all between 10 and 20 seconds. There was no reaction of the brainstem. So also the deeper structures, and we know it's also, let's say, the breathing center stops, is also close to the brainstem. So we know also the deeper structures of the brain do not function at all. And to have a waking consciousness, you need many neural centers working together and exchanging information, the global neuronal network and that is not available when you have cardiac arrest.
Well, you partially answered this question already, but I have to ask it anyway.
Yeah, okay.
The fact that consciousness isn't generated by the brain in this case, what role does the brain play, in essence, to you sort of touched on it, but if you had to give a general outline of what you believe the brain actually is there for in terms of governing this localized conscious wakeful experience, how would you summarize that?
I told a little bit before. I think we need a functioning brain to be alive in this world and to have experiences in this physical world. Because when you're out of this body, in the other non-local realm, you don't have the physical experiences as we have now. So the waking consciousness and also the short-term memories, but you can also say the brain is a transceiver. It transcends information from body and senses towards your consciousness, and it receives information from your consciousness into your brain and body.
And so as a young, sorry, Pim, you want to?
That's all right.
Continue.
No, it's all right.
I was going to ask, as a young materialist medical doctor who stumbles upon this and eventually realizes, okay, awareness may be non-local, extending beyond time and space. How did that impact you and change how you think of things like memory, identity, self? How did you perceive it prior to this and then thereafter?
Well, it was not from one moment to the other. And I think the most important thing, when I started cardiology, I was always impressed by the techniques. So the echocardiography, the cath lab, the catheters, the rhythm disturbance, etc. But at the end of my career, it was 10% of techniques and 90% was communicating with the patients. and then you know what people think, and you know what is behind the questions as well. So it's not about the heart, but it's about a patient who has fear or real problems with the heart as well. So it's much more than just the organ.
And when you think of memory, identity, or self,
Yeah.
how should someone now perceive this, knowing that this might be a non-local experience?
Well, I think that what we know now from research from near-death experiences, when we are awake in our waking consciousness, then we have our ego, and the ego is depending on our bodily functions. That means you have jealousy and hate and aggression and greed, etc. When you're out of your body, that's gone. You're just the essence of who you are. It's all about love, about acceptance, about compassion, about being interconnected with other people and being connected with animals, with plants, with planet Earth. So you're connected with everybody and everything, because that's the non-local aspect of consciousness. And you don't have this kind of feeling in your waking consciousness, except when you had a near-death experience. That's people with an NDE talk about what I said, enhanced intuitive sensitivity. They feel connected with everybody and everything. They feel connected with animals and plants and planet Earth and with other people. And they know that everything you do to others will come back to you. If you give hatred and aggression towards them, it will come back to you. When you give love and acceptance and compassion, it will come back to you. And it is also for nature. When you have problems with nature, how we treat planet Earth, it will come back to us. We know it already. So that's the lessons we can learn from it. So, so the essence of who we are is, we always call it self with capital. The self with capital is the highest aspect of who we are. And I think we are a light being. The self with capital is a light being, and sends sometimes aspects of who we are in this higher self towards back to the body to learn other lessons as well.
In sticking with this theme of phenomenology and transformation, many NDEs include similar events.
Yes.
Light, unity, unconditional love, as you mentioned. Do you interpret these as neuropsychological archetypes, or are these glimpses into the deeper structure of consciousness itself?
I think you said it already. Because when the brain doesn't function, it cannot be neurophysiological aspects of it. Must be aspects of consciousness, and these are universal elements. The problem is that the near-death experience is an ineffable experience. There are no words for it. So a child will use different words and interpretations as an adult, and a Christian will use different words as a Muslim, of an atheist, of a Buddhist. But to try to put into words this ineffable experience as well. And then there you have, as I said, you have being aware of being dead, the dark space, go through a tunnel, coming in a heavenly environment with beautiful landscapes and colors and music, and then meeting deceased relatives with communication, and meeting a being of light with feeling of unconditional love and access to wisdom. You understand at once quantum physics. When you're back in your body, you don't understand it anymore. You can have some life review, you can have a preview of someone's life. You come to a border, you know that when you cross this border, you will never come back. And there's usually a voice who tells you it's not your time yet, you have a task to fulfill. And then you're conscious return into the body, which is an awful experience, because you again experience all the pain and limitation of your disease. When you have a traffic accident, everything is broken. It's awful to be back in your body.
It's the psychological after effects of NDEs are quite profound. I mean, you mentioned all of them. There's less fear of death, greater compassion, or more sense of meaning. Yep. From your experience and from the data you've encountered, how often do you see these ever fully returning back to its previous state, where someone loses that sense of greater compassion? Has that been something you've encountered, or has it been a pretty permanent state in most people's lives?
Yes. First of all, we did a longitudinal study with taped interview 2 years and 8 years after the cardiac arrest with all survivors of cardiac arrest with an NDE, and a matched control group of patients who survived cardiac arrest with no memories. Matched control group is the same age, same gender, and the same time interval. And then what we found is that only patients with the NDE had the classical transformation. No fear of death. A new insight was important in life. So unconditional love and compassion towards yourself, accept your own negative aspects we all have, and then towards others and towards nature. And they're more interested in spirituality. And the third aspect is enhanced intuitive sensitivity. That means that this is the objective proof of the subjective experience, because only patients with an NDE had this transformation. But having had an NDE, you try to talk about it with doctors. They say it's total nonsense and hallucination. Here, you get medication, you get over it. So usually they stop talking about it for years. I've met people who have been silent about it for 50 years after first attempt to talk, to share it with others. And there's a period of depression, homesickness, and loneliness. So NDE is a spiritual trauma. Despite the positive content, it's very hard to be back in this material world. I always, as a joke, said, when you have an NDE in India, you get congratulations. When you have it in the Western world, yes, you're just crazy. And they think they're crazy. They don't know there's a name for it. They don't know that they're not the only one. Patients have been referred to psychiatric institutions, but they keep talking. But once they hear and read a book or see it on television or hear a podcast, and so it has a name, it's in their death experience, and they start to accept it. It takes years, and then they got to integrate it in their life. That means the materials world is not important anymore. They don't give, money is not important. How the society is working, but they become vegetarian. They love nature. They love silence. So they changed a lot, and this is a permanent change. There's, after cardiac arrest of 3 minutes, there's a permanent life change the rest of their lives. But first they have to accept it, and they have to integrate it, and that can take years and years.
Yeah, it's almost like this blissful high that you enter, and then thereafter have to come back to reality. It does sound pretty sad.
It is sad for them.
Yeah. Part of the goal with my channel was, as a medical doctor myself, when growing up fundamentally materialist, and then doing a philosophy degree thereafter, when I did that, it sort of changed so many views of my own. And a big part of this podcast is to try and expose others to more deeper philosophical thinking. Do you think when you're engaging with skeptics, do you believe that there might be one day a shared scientific language you could use to explore these with people? Or do you find it's very difficult still today, after all of this, to communicate these ideas?
Well, I have hardly met any skeptics who want to discuss it with me.
Mm.
And when you're internet, then I'm talking about deniers and debunkers. A skeptic is someone who wants to think about it. But a debunker and a denier doesn't accept. And usually the problem is, there have been discussions, also Rupert Sheldrake has discussed, and other people have discussions talking with a debunker or a denier. They don't know the literature. They have just prejudice and willful ignorance. They haven't read my book, they haven't read the Lancet, and they haven't read anything else. I've published many articles, but also other people like Bruce Grayson, Ken Regan, and other, Sam Parney, Peter Fenwick, have been so many books, but they have an opinion without any basis of science at all. So they have a problem. I don't mind if they don't accept my ideas. Then they have a problem. That's not my problem anymore. I've learned it.
Yeah, I think there's nothing worse than formulating a conclusion about something without actually sifting through the data and actually reading the person's work before making it.
I will never want to convince anybody.
Mm.
It's up to them if they want to be open or not. And you know, there are a lot of also professors and neuroscientists, etc. They tell personally to me, you could be right, but officially said this total nonsense until they reach higher. And then they said, perhaps I was wrong my whole life, because they lose their research money, they lose their position in the university. It says it's dangerous to tell other people in this kind of academic world that it could be different as we always thought. But based on this prospective studies on the death experience, we have to reconsider the never proven hypothesis that consciousness is a product of brain function. And the death is just the end of our body, but not the end of our consciousness. And when you have, I've been now studying it for 39 years, it's so normal for me now. But it was, let's say, totally new for me when I started.
Yeah, look, do you believe, Pim, that one day we might be able to measure or detect this consciousness independent of the brain? And if so, like what type of technologies do you think might make these paradigms possible?
It's impossible. You cannot measure in the non-local realm. It's beyond the physical world. So you cannot measure it. Let's say when you measure activity in the brain, you get neural correlates. And that's, so you see activities in the brain, you can measure it by EEG or MEG or fMRI or PET scan. But it doesn't say anything about the content of consciousness. So the current materialist science, only that is true what you can objectify, what you can measure, what you duplicate, and what you can falsify. Now, what you think and feel your consciousness, you cannot measure, you cannot objectify, you cannot duplicate, you cannot falsify. So consciousness does not exist at all in a materialist science. And that's the problem. So we have to expand science to a post-materialist science to include subjective experience. But you cannot objectify consciousness in the non-local realm. It's always about subjective experiences. So we have to change science to include subjective experiences. And what we did with the transformation, it's a kind of objective proof of the subjective experiences. But you cannot prove subjective experience. Never. We have to accept it.
Pim, when you look at your work and your current view of the mind-body problem, let's say, how does your work sit within this long tradition of philosophical theories? Is it a monist theory? Is it dual aspect theory? How would you describe this as a philosophical view?
Yeah, I'm always reluctant to give it a name. Let's say it has been in whole human history. It has been said in Buddhism, it has been said in the Vedas and the Upanishads in Hinduism, it has been said in the Kabbalah, it has been Gnostic Christianity, it has been all the people who were living in this world, we have anthroposophy. Everybody has said that death is not the end. For me now, most comes to is let's perhaps ontological idealism or panpsychism or proto-panpsychism, but I'm very reluctant because people are talking about a terminology and I want to talk about the content. So and for me, consciousness is fundamental in the universe. So everything comes from consciousness. Matter is derivative from consciousness and not the other way around. So consciousness is always everywhere together with energy and information. It's fundamental in the universe. So it starts with consciousness, and your body also has started with consciousness, and the world we see around us started with consciousness. And also these animals and plants and planet Earth have kind of subjective aspect, which you call also it's not a human consciousness, but it's a kind of subjectivity, because everything comes from this fundamental consciousness, primary consciousness.
Do you think that, for example, William James, he suggested at some point that the brain transmits rather than creates consciousness. A century later, do you think that neuroscience is finally catching up to that intuition at least? Because I find today when I interview guests as well and speak to people, this seems to be a growing theme, that people are starting to question things more. They are starting to ask questions about consciousness beyond the brain. What have been your views throughout the years?
Yeah, I'm very positive. Let's say you have the Journal of Consciousness Studies, and 20 years ago it was 80% materialist-based studies on consciousness, and now it's about 60-70% post-material-based studies on consciousness. So it's changing, and especially the younger generation like you are much more open than my generation. So when I give lectures to medical students, and also the emails I receive from everywhere, the younger generation, younger doctors are aware of it, nurses are more aware of it. So it's better for the patient who want to share the NDE with the medical profession as well. So I'm positive, it will change.
And if consciousness truly continues after physical death, as doctors, how should how does that reshape our medical ethics, let's say, around resuscitation, organ donation, end of life care? How do you believe this would impact that?
Oh, a lot. It makes a lot. Let's say when the end of life care, it's about the moment of dying, the terminal phase. Then you have several experiences which are based on non-local consciousness, end of life experiences. People who are in the terminal phase of illness can be in contact with the consciousness of deceased relatives, let's say partners or parents of a deceased child. They see the light, they see beautiful landscape, they know that the moment of transition is near. Unfortunately, most doctors and nurses and other people think they are hallucinations or side effects of drugs. But the recent research from Switzerland is about more than 80% of people in terminal phase of illness have this kind of end-of-life experience. But it's just always good, easy to express it to others. But they are in and out the body. Then you have the terminal lucidity. People who have the end phase of Alzheimer's disease, who don't recognize the family members for years, or even are in coma or unconscious, suddenly sit up in bed, recognize the family members, call them by name, thank them, and die. I mean, you know how the brain looks in the end stage of Alzheimer's. It's just a lot of mess in the skull. There's no brain function left. They have to share that experience. The people are healthy and are at the deathbed of a very close loved one. At the moment he dies, you can see the light, or even are taken with them in the death experience. They get out of the body to the tunnel, to the light, see sometimes the life review of the deceased, and then at once they're back in the body at the bed where the friend died. Share that experience. They're normal people who have this kind of experience. Then you have the perimortal experience, that you 4 o'clock in the night you wake up, think of your father, and you say, oh, how sad, or how is he? And the next morning you got a phone call that at that very moment he died. So you have communication. Sometimes you see them as a light being saying goodbye to you. And they have the post-mortal experiences, after-death communication. About 125 million people in Europe have this kind of experiences. It usually happens during the night. But you call it a dream. It's not a dream. It's got a dream you will forget, but you never forget this kind of experiences. About 80% of the people have experience of after-death communication in the first days, weeks of months after the death of a close family member. They can see them, they can hear them, they can communicate with them, they can smell them, they can feel them. Everything is possible. And usually they say, I had a dream, but it is not a dream. And when you have this after-death communication, it proves that consciousness of a deceased relative is still there. Consciousness is always there. So when I give lectures, also 30 or 40% of the people in the audience, when I ask for it, say, I had an after-death communication. That's why they come, because they know now, or the other way around, that they have contact with this consciousness of deceased relatives. It's all the consciousness means also it's non-local. It's always there. And you have access to it when you're alive as well. So all these kind of experiences prove that consciousness is still there. But it's not let's say, scientific proof. A real scientific proof is just with mathematics. You can prove, but you cannot prove in psychology or psychiatry or this kind of subjective experience. You cannot prove it. It's beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah, it reminds me when I spoke to Noam Chomsky about this. He spoke about how the whole scientific revolution was completely abandoned after Newton, because once theories became so complex that it could not explain reality anymore, we started developing theories to just explain what we believe made the most sense. So science ultimately just dropped the ball on trying to understand the fundamental nature of reality. And he said there is no mind-body problem because technically there is no body, because we just don't know what matter is. The only thing we really know is
the matter doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just emptiness.
Exactly. And he was like, there is just no mind-body problem. There is no body. We don't know what matter is, which is ultimately something that you kind of fundamentally agree with. How has this changed your life when it comes to personal implications? How has your
Yeah,
research actually shaped how you live, how you see death, and understand purpose?
yeah, that's a good question as well. I think people ask me what about my death. I say I'm curious. I'm not afraid. I'm curious what will happen. But my life changed as well. My wife is very open. She was physiotherapist, but then she did Tai Chi and Qigong and Shiatsu, traditional Chinese medicine, yoga, etc. So she's open for everything. So both our life changed. Our home is always silence. But we garden. We love gardening. We live 300 meters from a national park. Each day we are out at least 1 hour biking or walking in nature. We are both vegetarian. My wife more strict than I am, but in a restaurant perhaps sometimes take fish, but and we have also in our home we have a place where 50 families each Saturday come and take the biological dynamic vegetables. It's based on anthroposophy. So for 25, 30 years we have a place where people come. So it's a farmer who brings the vegetables with us and the family comes here. So we have for more than 30 years biological dynamic vegetables as well. So we changed our life as well. My wife's also interested in anthroposophy also a bit. So we're discussing a lot.
Mm. It seems that well, also as a cardiologist, I'm assuming you know how healthy that is for you. So after seeing
Yeah.
years and years of block, I assume you've made a good decision.
We walk a lot and bike a lot still each day. And I'm now 82, but I'm still each day bike and walk.
You know, it's incredible. When you think about back when you were a young medical student, perhaps as a materialist thinker, I assume you were skeptical of things like parapsychology, any phenomenon that was outside of the scientific realm. Have you explored that any more since this journey? Things like telepathy or talking,
Yeah.
sort of accessing streams of consciousness beyond what we consider scientific.
Yeah. First of all, I never used the word paranormal and I never used the word parapsychology. It's normal, it's a psychology, but you need different theories about it. As a young doctor, I was not interested. My father was a neurologist, and my father couldn't accept my research in his experiences. He had a problem with it. But I know, let's say, when you read about, study about near-death experience and non-local consciousness, then you have telepathy, which are called non-local information exchange. You can get information beyond time and beyond space. You have perception, what we call remote viewing, as non-local perception. I know Stephen Schwartz, who had written books about it. So it's possible to know exactly what happens on a long distance or in a long time. Stephen Schwartz did studies in Egypt, and he could find, by non-local perception, palaces who were not known yet. So it's real. But I never used the word telepathy. I use non-local perception, non-local information exchange, etc. I try to because consciousness is always interconnected, no time, no place. The information is possible.
Yeah, no,
And it's much more normal than we know. So many people have this kind of experiences. So also future events, prognostic dreams. You dream about something, and then a year later you see a marriage or whatever, or déjà vu, where you come somewhere on a place, I must have been there, but not now. So all this kind of experience is an aspect of non-local consciousness.
but this might be too personal, but have you ever had a near-death experience?
I always say not as far as I know. But in my aura and in my, it said perhaps when I was 2 years old, but I don't know.
Mm.
But I resonate with all the people who have an NDE and share it with me. And they come to me, they feel that I'm open. So people who don't know me come to me and start to share their experience with me. So it could be.
Do you feel like maybe things like quantum mechanics or our lack of understanding of physical reality today and the fact that people are exploring this and so many different diverse theories is helping this field grow and sort of triggering people to think beyond the brain?
Yeah. Well, I use quantum physics also written a chapter about it because I'm used to the terminology non-local consciousness. Non-local is beyond time, beyond space, and interconnected. But I use quantum physics as an analogy and not as an explanation for consciousness. I use neurophysiology, and I use NDE research to understand the aspects of near-death experiences. But quantum physics is just an analogy.
Yeah, it's always tough because a lot of people try to use that as an explanation. So I really like
and another thing is also for quantum, not all quantum physicists believe it, but consciousness is essential because the observer doesn't exist, because the observer makes an experiment, and the result of the experiment is depending of the consciousness of the observer. So there's no objectivity at all at last in science. You can prove that light behaves as particles, and you can prove that light behaves as waves. Both is true, but it is not possible to have it. So consciousness is fundamental also for quantum physics, and also we know now that there is no objective science at all. It's something to think about.
It is. Is there any reason why you almost went down the panpsychist route versus the idealist route with your explanation of consciousness?
It's not for me, what I told you before, it's not about the terminology. I can talk and discuss it. I know Bernardo Kastrup very well. And I can discuss with people, also with philosophers. The terminology is not so important for me. We can discuss the ideas and not the terminology.
Yeah, it almost encloses someone into a box that they then get stuck defending.
Exactly.
And so, often too far.
It shouldn't become a dogma, and that's the problem. It shouldn't become a dogma.
When you look at looking forward, when you look at the next generation of scientists and philosophers, what do you see them doing differently in terms of studying the nature of consciousness? What would you like to see, actually?
Well, I think it should be important that a lot of neuroscientists, but also physicians and other philosophers, know about the results of near-death experience research, because they don't know. And they don't want to know, because they're frightened. If it could be true that they have been wrong their whole life, there's a huge problem for them. So, but what I told you, the younger generation is much more open. I also know neuroscientists in the Netherlands who are more open for non-local consciousness, but they're very reluctant to share it with others as well. But it will change. Let's say my book, Conscious Beyond Life, is now in most schools in the Netherlands. For 60, 70-year-old students get my book to read and to give something to write about. And my granddaughter, studying psychology in the second year, she had my book and had to do an exam about it. So it's changing. The younger generation is more open and they know more. But it's a small process. It's a process that will take some time. But again, I'm positive.
That's incredible. I think that's great to see things come full circle like that. When you were exploring this and finally came out of your materialist view of the brain as the main function for consciousness, what books did you read? Which authors were the people who took you out of this and took you even further into this, for people who are curious and would like to read?
I always say people with an NDE have been my greatest teachers. That's it. You have to listen to people with open mind, and science is asking a question with an open mind. It's also you have to get rid of your dogmas, because otherwise you cannot listen anymore, you cannot read anymore, because you're still in your tunnel vision. So, but I've read many books when I started to read. I started to read the Bible, for instance, and Tibetan Buddhism and the Upanishads and whatever books, but a lot of philosophy books, consciousness books, quantum physics books, a lot of books about near-death experience. But the most important thing for me was the starting point was listen to people with an NDE. They have been really my teachers.
And if you had to summarize the ultimate message that comes from that, for anyone who still skeptical, still curious about NDEs, What about that topic do you love so much? And if you had to summarize the major findings of what you think would fundamentally shift someone to explore this topic, what would those be?
I think that based on what we know now is that death is just the end of your body, but not the end of your consciousness. There's no beginning, nor will there ever be an end to consciousness. It's before birth and after death, there's consciousness. So when you die, you're involved in unconditional love. You will be connected with other people you love. So it's not the end of who we are. I think that's the most important aspect of what we have learned. And we are always connected, also when we have died. So the lesson is also we have to live now with love to others as well. When you help people to be nice or when you help people to help, there are two different aspects. Just helping to help is important, but helping to be nice is something else. So this kind of lessons you have to learn. It's just about be open to others and helping others and giving love to others.
When it comes to the universe,
and to nature.
Exactly. I was about to take this further as well. When it comes to the universe itself, do you think there is a teleological purpose to all of this? Do you believe that fundamentally consciousness might have a purpose in this, or is there a purpose in the universe for you?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because there's no definition of consciousness as well. I think we have a consciousness during our life to learn lessons, I think, and the essence of who we are, the higher self with capital, has always been there and will always be there. So, and this is just universal love, compassion and acceptance. That's the essence of who we are. And we have to learn during our life, we have to learn this lesson. And I think that could be the purpose of this non-local or universal of divine consciousness, whatever you would call it.
Yeah, I think that's the most intriguing part of exploring these theories of consciousness. When Robert Lawrence Kuhn wrote there's 350 theories of consciousness. It's just growing and growing. But the funny thing is that it's intriguing because every theory of consciousness must have some sort of philosophical outcome. So the ethics change, or the values change, the morals change. And generally, when it comes to these panpsychist theories, or I know you don't want to label them and put them into boxes, but they tend to have a slightly better overall philosophical picture and ethical framework that comes out of it than our generalized dead matter view. So I think that's one of the most positive things that does come out of these experiences for people, is that it does
they're more interested in spirituality.
Mm.
Spirituality is the search for inner knowledge by experience, inner wisdom just by experience. I think that's what people are starting to do, just more spiritual beings, who the essence of who we are.
And as a Dr. Pim, who's explored such profound topics, do you find things like psychedelics or meditation, other forms of consciousness experiences, as almost a transcendence into that realm, to almost tuning in, let's say, to dig deeper?
Sometimes it can happen. Let's say people who meditate sometimes get an experience of enhanced consciousness, but more often not. And it cannot be the purpose for meditation to get this enhanced consciousness, but it may happen. When you use psychedelics, sometimes it may happen that you have enhanced consciousness, usually not the same elements as an NDE, but mostly it are hallucinations, frightening experience, negative after effects, etc. So it's dangerous as well. It can be dangerous, but there have been also examples of very positive after LSD or psilocybin or DMT or whatever. But it is not easy and it could be dangerous as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And what's interesting is they have done fMRI studies in people who are using these psychedelics, and then you see parts of the brain becoming less active when they have enhanced consciousness experiences. That's also interesting.
Yeah. That yeah, but when I spoke to Bernardo, he spoke about exactly the same thing, and
Yeah,
I think he finds that to be one of the ultimate markers that show because there's so
yeah,
much activity occurring.
yeah,
So if the reverse is happening in the brain, it just makes sense that definitely
yeah,
not the source.
exactly, exactly.
But if you when you look at your work, it's a vast body of knowledge, so much to explore. I'll put links to your books down below as well. Outside of NDEs, outside of out of body experiences, any other areas that you feel can help fine tune this work or bring us closer to understanding the conscious experience?
Yeah, but I think what I told you before, all the experiences around the deathbed and the dying, it happens so often that usually people are silent about it. They have to share it with others. So the end of life experiences, the after death communication, the terminal lucidity, uh, they are all aspects of non-local consciousness. And so we have to discuss it. Why can it happen so often? And it's because it's normal. But interpretation of what's happening to us, they don't understand because they just believe it's a dream. But what I also told you before, you normally forget a dream, but this you never forget. So these kind of experiences are important aspects of non-local consciousness beside the scientific research of near-death experiences.
It's almost like we have to be retrained as medical doctors as well to approach that with patients when you explore that clinical concept because
Oh
it's
yeah,
a paradigm shift in thinking.
it's just, and it's to be open-minded.
Mm.
What I said, it's just, so you forget what you've learned and listen to the patients, and you get more and more intuition as well. When you're open for patients, you hear much more behind the words as well.
But when you look back at your career and you reach closer to that, we're all getting there. As you said, we need to normalize this topic. When you look back at your life, what would you most like to be remembered for?
I think I'm just grateful for the life I had. I'm grateful for my wife and my children and my grandchildren. I'm grateful the way I could live, being a cardiologist and doing the NDE research. I'm grateful for it. So I'm happy. And great. That's my conclusion when I'm 82 years old now. I'm looking back and I'm happy and grateful.
You 82 years young, Pim. It's
Yeah.
still rocking, bro. When that heart stops beating, where do
Yeah.
you think Pim goes afterwards?
Yeah. I'm curious. I think I will go in the other dimension. So that's what I said. I will be curious. So I have not fear. Perhaps reluctant to think about the dying process of dying. That could be very unpleasant. But as soon as I leave my body, it will be wonderful.
Yeah, I guess it all comes down to the mechanism of death, eh? Like, do
Yeah,
you want to get shot in the leg and bleed out for hours before it finally happens versus going
exactly.
quietly in the night? I
Yeah.
think it's hopefully the best we go quietly in the night. Pim, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to chat to you, and your work's incredible. Your body of work's all amazing. It's been such a pleasure to read it and reread it because I read your book quite some time ago, and then to go back through it, it's been really great. Any final words from you, Pim? Anything you feel we haven't touched on that you'd like to explore before
Well,
closing off?
it was a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank
you you are already a lot. You have prepared well. So and I hope that also this kind of podcast help people to open their minds. I think that's why I do these kind of. I've given more than 50 interviews the last 2 3 years. So and I think it's important because it's the NDE research has been done, but a lot of people don't know anything about it. So it's important, and most people don't like to read books anymore. So this kind of interviews is helpful, perhaps, to change the minds of a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what this podcast is trying to do. So hopefully people see this, interact, engage. Perm, if there's any links to any specific articles or papers you want me to put in the description for people to click on, please do share. And
Now,
I will,
my website is consciousbeyondlife.com, and you
yeah,
can have all the scientific articles. You can have a lot of interviews. You can see everything you want to see. So my website is
yeah,
very extensive.
I'll put a link to all of that as well, Perm,
And my link to my book as well, perhaps.
yeah,
Conscious
and
Beyond Life.
continuity of consciousness, all your papers,
And I think the paper, The Continuity of Consciousness from the Bigelow Institute, is a very important paper. I kind of recommend it. It's only 40 pages, so it is a kind of updated summary for my book.
Yeah, it's nice and accessible. Hopefully a quick read for some people, but we'll see how fast they can get through it. But yeah, man, Pim, it's amazing. It's incredible work, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
I have still one point. Did you read the last book by Dan Brown?
No, I have not yet.
The Ultimate Secret.
No, not yet.
It's just about near-death experiences, non-local consciousness, telepathy, non-local perception, etc. It's just what I told you is just in his book. And I've been studying it for 8 years now, and I don't know if he read my book, but I think he must have read my book as well. So that's very important, that because millions of people will read this book, and they will read about non-local consciousness, near-death experiences, telepathy, non-local perception, etc. So it's very helpful to other people to be open.
Yes, it's almost like it bridges that popular culture with this
exactly.
It makes it a lot more.
And that's very positive.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen, is that the more pop culture starts to get into this, and that's mainstream academia cannot do this alone. You have to sort of bridge in some sort of a popular media, and then that's when the message gets received.
The change will come from the population, not from science. Thank you. It was nice to talk with you.